Welcome. It's been quite some time since I made a YouTube video, and I decided that after this break, it's time to start again. Today, I'd like to post a review of using the interface of what used to be Nik and is now DxO Color Efex Pro. Let's get started. This is the interface when you open the program. And there's really three parts. Up here, we have the filter library. In the middle is your image. There's a couple of items that will control how you see what effect you've applied, the before and after. And over here are your lists of filters that you're actually put into use. The ones on the left are the available ones. These on the right are the ones that you've actually applied to the image. And on the bottom is the loop and the histogram. So let's start with the left. This is the filter library. And this list is all the filters that are available for you to use. If you want to favorite a filter because you use it a lot, you just click on the star. With the star off, it's not a favorite. And with the star on, it is a favorite. I don't use too much. This divides the filters up into different uses. The only thing I tend to use is all if I want to see them all. And favorites. So if you click favorites, instead of being greeted by all the filters that are available, you just have the ones you're favorited. These happen to be the ones I use the most: brilliance, warmth, contrast only, darken, lighten, center, detail extractor, glamour, glow, midnight, pro contrast, and tonal contrast. Again, that's not to say I don't use other ones. These are just the ones that I use more often. And you'll notice that in the favorites and in the all, they're always listed in alphabetical order. And you can see them all. So those are filters, but what are recipes? So recipes are, let's say you've applied more than one filter to get a certain look. And you're doing a project and you'd like to give all the photos in that project that look. Or maybe it's not even for multiple photos. Maybe you've put multiple filters on one photo and really like the result, and you think, hey, I'd sort of like to use that again in the future. Then you go to your list of filters, you click Save Recipe, and those recipes will appear here. These are a couple that I've used in a prior project. But what happens is, and I'll show you, is if you click on the Save Recipe and you look on the right, it'll remove everything that you've done and apply that recipe, which in this case looks horrible on this particular picture, but it'll apply all the filters that were in that recipe. So that's what recipes are all about. And history is just what you might expect. It's going back and forth, and I'm going to get rid of that recipe I applied, and we'll go back to the original. And just by clicking these, you can go back to recipes and filter library. So that's the left panel. Up here are different ways to compare what you've done to your image. So let me make it extreme, the effect, extreme, just so we can say, I mean, this is, a big application, but let's reset everything. So let's say you want to see what it looked like before. This is the single image view, which shows you what you've done to it. This is the split preview. So if you slide this, the right side is what you've applied and the left side is the original. So you can go back and forth to see what you've done to several portions of the image. If you'd rather split the screen horizontally instead of vertically, you just click here and then you can go this way for your look. If you'd rather see smaller images but the entire image at once, you can get a side-by-side preview by clicking here. And this is back to the single image view with everything applied. Okay, so that takes care of those two panels. This is where the rubber meets the road here. So when you open up your picture, it typically is going to open with the last filter that you applied as being applied to your new image. You know, it's just one of the things that it does. It gives you your last filter that you use because it thinks since you used it last, you might want to use it again. And not only that, it opens it with the last settings you used in that filter. So you can't just take the opening picture and say, oh, that's what the filter is going to do, because it's going to use your last settings. If you want to go back to the default settings, you just double click each of the sliders. And again, these are meant to be adjusted, and we'll see what those do. If you want to get rid of that filter because it was the last one you used, but you really don't want to use it on this image, you just click this little X here and it's gone. And you're back to your original, and it'll say empty filter. There's nothing there. So to apply a filter, you have to select one. Let's go again with the tonal contrast, which was open. It's one of my favorites. And these sliders are meant to be played with. So if you're not sure what a slider does, you just play with it. So for example, this will apply tonal contrast to the highlights. And you can see by going back and forth sort of what it does. If you go too far, this becomes sort of ugly looking because it's got a lot of white in it. But, you know, there's a happy medium. Same with midtones. You can see this is really affecting the foreground and the barn quite a bit. And if you go negative, it's very similar to negative clarity. And then your shadows. And what it's doing in effect is you could look at the histogram and you can carry this too far. And this is why I like to have a little headroom in the histogram before I bring it into color effects. It's applying contrast to certain tones. So if you're applying it to the shadows, that means it's making the darker portions of the shadow blacker and the lighter portions of the shadows lighter. Like look at these here. Let's set it to 0. And look at this window here, for example. So these are all in shadow, but there's some lighter parts up here and some darker parts up here. And when I increase the shadow slider, these darks are going to get darker and these lights are going to get lighter. Take a look. See, back and forth. And so it's providing extra contrast in the shadows. So these are the default settings that any filter will give you, and you play with them and get something you like. And here there's just different kinds of contrast, and if you just hover over them. So for example, this is the standard way the filter develops the contrast or delivers the contrast. Here's another way, another way, another way, and another way. What's the right way? The way that looks best to you. Now, these two sliders are very important. Think of these as your protection sliders. So for example, we have in the highlights, for example, we set to 25%. And let's say we think, okay, you know, that looks pretty good, but it's sort of, again, it's taking the highlights and it's making the brighter highlights brighter and the darker highlights darker. And it looks like maybe this is a little too strong and a little too bright. So this is a way to define what highlights are going to be affected. So if we take this to the right, we're going to protect the brighter highlights. And by that I mean the tonal contrast filter will not be applied to the brighter highlights. Watch what happens. Let's see where the brighter areas are. Probably here, maybe a bit in here, maybe a little bit by these whites. But as I drag this slider to the right, it is going to protect those areas and not apply the filter. Same thing with the shadow. Remember, this became very black. Well, just to emphasize it, we can increase it more. If you want to protect the shadows and not apply the filter to the darkest shadows, you can slide this up and look at the windows and you'll see what's happening. And the barn too, you're protecting the shadows. So again, it's just a way to really apply the filter while not having it affect certain areas that you might want to protect from the filter. Control points are very important as well. And again, it is another way of protecting from the effect of a filter. What do I mean? For example, there's positive and negative. Let's just say, let's just say I don't like this little area here, what the filter has done, that it's made it a little too dark for me. We're going to take a negative control point. We click on it. We come over to the picture and we click where we want to put it. So you saw that there was a change. This upper will define how big that area that's affected is. And this will define the opacity. Right now, the opacity of the filter over that area is nothing. So that little area that's that big, approximately, does not have the filter applied to it. Let's say we want to apply the filter, but not at 100%, because we don't like what it did at 100%. Well, we can apply it partially. So this would be 100% application of the filter. This would be 28%. So it gives you very fine control over the areas. Now, let's just say you're not quite sure what areas are affected by the control point. So, okay, you can go like this and click and see the circle. Or you can click here, and the black is the area that the control point has some influence over. And let's say you don't want it to have influence out here. See, this is a little more exact than the circle. You can just, with that on, you could control the size, and you can start to say, okay, I want it to just control this much and nothing elsewhere. And then when you're done with that and you want to go back, we can go into it. You just, when we talk, click this and you're good to go. Let's say you want to get rid of the control point because you decided, I'd rather not have to, I liked it the way it was originally. And actually before I even do that, you can see you can click the effect of the control point on and off, and you can leave it off if you don't want it. But let's just say you don't like it at all. You click the garbage can, boom, gone. Okay. There's some other things you can do. It gets a little complicated. You can duplicate control points and move them to different areas, which, by the way, let's say I'll show you something now. So let's say you put the control point here, okay, and you want to move it. Let's say you don't like it exactly where it is. You can move it wherever you want. These things are very movable. And let's say you like what that control point is doing here and you want to do it elsewhere. Instead of getting rid of it, you can actually duplicate it. And now there's two of them, and you can move one over here. So let's get rid of these. Okay. So now we have the effect of this filter. Let's say we don't want quite so much. I don't know. I'm just doing this quickly. But let's say we're sort of liking that. Yeah, let's say this to me looks a little bright. We can take it still looks a little bright there. For example, we can take a negative control point. We can put it there. We can set the we can change the opacity, etc. Anyway, let's say we now want to add another filter. This is where you have to be careful. If you just go over here, let's say with darken, lighten, center, because I like that one. If I just go over here and click darken, lighten, center, look what happens. Whoops. Our tonal contrast filter is gone and it was replaced by darken, lighten, center. Not what we wanted. So let's get rid of this by Xing it out. Let's go back and put the tonal contrast filter back. And if you want to turn it off just to get another sense of what it did, this little check mark, that's the original. That's with the filter. Again, just another way of comparing. So we want to add that darken, lighten, center. How do we do that without getting rid of the tonal contrast? We come right down here and you have to click Add Filter. If you just click the new filter, it'll replace the one that's there. But if you click Add Filter, it saves the tonal contrast filter. It tells you you have an empty slot. And now we can go to darken, lighten, center. And we have our tonal contrast, which we can go back to and adjust if we want. And we have the new darken, lighten, center. So this one, again, every time you open a new filter, they all have different settings. And they try to be self-explanatory, but it's not always the case that it is, and you can just play with them. So in this one, let's decide what the star of the show is, what the center of the photo should be. And in this, well, the whole photo is really interesting. I don't know, what's the center? Let's say you wanted these flowers here to be the center. You click Place Center, and the center means the center of interest. Okay. Now, how much of the center, or how big is that area? The way to figure that out is to just increase the effect beyond what you would normally do. So I'm going to put the center luminosity up to 100%. And now when we affect center size, you can sort of see what's being affected. So the center might be more like this in terms of size. And you can go back and say, you know what? Nah, that's not really the star of the show. Maybe it's really sort of up here. Or maybe it's over here. You know, you can decide what you think the star of the show is. And now that we have adjusted our center size, now we can bring this back to a more reasonable level. And again, if you want to see what the default recommendation is, just double click. The default here is 25%. So that brightens the center, and this darkens everything else. See, providing a bit of a vignette that's almost, it can be very subtle, so it's almost subconscious. You know, something like this. The default, again, is much heavier, but you can make it, you know, less intense if you want. And again, let's say, for example, you want this area a little brighter. So the border luminosity was changing it. Okay. Let's say you like the vignette all over, but you know, you wish the vignette didn't extend into the barn and it just extended to the tree. You can take this negative control point and put it over that area of the barn you don't like, or you don't like darker. And you've now taken away the darkening area from that segment of the barn. So again, you've protected wherever you put the negative control point from the effect of the filter. And this means the filter is 0%. If you want to, you know, go back to what the filter has, you can see here, I don't know if it's going to come in the video, but this will restore the darkening. Just to exemplify it a little better, I'm going to go again beyond what you would normally do. And you can see here, we can make it a little bigger just like the other one. We can see here that this is at full opacity of the filter, and this is protecting the barn. Now when we do that, you can see here that the histogram moves as expected. And if you would rather not have the histogram but have a magnifier, this shows you wherever at 100%, whatever your cursor is over. And you can go back. Whoop. You can go back to the loop. Back to the histogram. Now you want to add another filter. Again, make sure you hit add filter and not just go right here and choose one, because otherwise it will replace. If you want to see what it looks like without the dark and lighten center, take that off, without the tonal contrast, just with dark and lighten center, and now with both. And you actually can change, because sometimes it makes a difference, you can actually change the position of the filter. So here I've put dark and lighten on top of the tonal contrast. And again, in some it doesn't make a difference. Here it does look like it makes a bit of a difference if you look up in here. And now we're going to put dark and lighten center back as the second filter. There we go. So I hope this gives you something maybe that you can refer to if you forget how some of the stuff is oriented, or if it's not performing exactly how you thought you wanted it to. All right, I hope that's helpful. Before we go, I did forget one thing I wanted to show you on this left panel. All these filters, there's so many of them. What do they do? Well, of course you could apply each one and see, but there is a little shortcut that's very helpful. Let's say you're interested in, for example, what the film effects faded might do to the picture. When you hover over it, this little blue thing here emerges only when you hover over it. So you just click on it and it opens up a little panel, and it shows you some options for the filter. And again, these are starting points because you can move the slider, but it shows you what might be achieved. So let's say you like this film effects faded look. I don't particularly like it, but at least not in this picture. But let's say you like it, you just click on that and it's applied to your picture. And of course, you can adjust the sliders and the effect that you get. Let's get rid of that. And then if you don't like what you're seeing here, you just click back. And let's try it one more time, just again. So let's say Glamour Glow. Click there. Another bunch of options. Subtle, strong, cool, warm. Let's say we try the cool warm glow. Again, it opens the filter. It gives you the sliders you might like. And to go back to the filters, you just click back. And you don't have to apply it. You can just, if we get rid of this, if we went to Glamour Glow again and we saw what it did and we didn't really like any of them, we could just go back and say, oh, let's look for another filter. And finally, I should mention that once you have a filter applied, there is an opacity slider. So you can control the degree to which that filter is applied. When you're happy with what you've done, you just click Save, and your filters that you might have added will be saved and applied to the image. Anyway, I just thought I wanted to add those couple things in. I'm Howard, and my channel is about introducing viewers to photographers who inspire, to discussing all sorts of photographic topics, and to enhancing creativity with Photoshop and Lightroom tutorials. And if those topics sound interesting to you, I'd really appreciate your support of the channel by having you click on that subscribe button below. We'll see you next time.